Craig here on the third floor. Welcome you back. This is part 4 on our series of painting the Domador de Cadaveres by Wyrd Miniatures. In part 1, we learned how to build the miniature. In part 2, we went over the face and how to do the makeup and facial features. In part 3, we did the flesh. We did a light Caucasian flesh tone, and now we're in part 4. We're going to focus on her black hair. Hair can be tricky, especially black hair, and black in general can be a little bit tricky, but one little tip I'll give you on black hair, or any type of hair color, is go to Google Images and look at ads for hair color products. So hair dyes, the pictures that they use on the boxes are really good references for painting hair. So if you want to paint blonde hair, go look at blonde hair dye ads on the front of the boxes using Google Images, and they'll give you some nice reference points. But the main thing to learn here today is how to handle black hair. The challenge with painting black is you need to highlight black, but you don't want to lose the fact that what you're painting is black, and that's easy to do if you over highlight it. And in general, especially with hair, highlights are very precise and small because of the sheen. Large highlighted areas give you kind of a dull sheen appearance, whereas something that has a high sheen like hair, you need small, tight highlights. So we're going to learn how to do that and how light strikes across hair, really in parallel lines. So that'll be the focus. One extra little bit is you're going to see me lose control of the brush, the paint coming off the brush about 2/3 through the video. And you get to see how I quickly adjust to clean that up and fix it, and how I change the consistency of my paint in order to fix it. We're using all the same tools that we used before. So if you've watched the other videos, parts 2 and 3, you've already seen the brushes that I'm going to use, the holder that I'm using. Refer to the beginning of those videos if you want to learn more about those. The only thing in addition is I'm using the black and white set from scale 75. That's where I'm using my blacks and my warm grays for this. Do me a favor, we've got a lot more to do on this model. We're going to be focusing on painting cloth, including the shawl and the red dress. We're also going to be doing some freehand work on the back of the shawl, and I'll show you how to do decorative items on the dress as well. We're going to finish things off by doing a sheer stocking on the legs. So like and subscribe to this video, subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified as those other videos get made and put up. The support's been overwhelming. I do appreciate it, but let's go ahead and jump in and let's learn how to paint black hair.
Okay, let's start painting some black hair. Now the challenge with painting black in general, and it passes over to black hair as well, is it can be difficult to highlight black while still making it look black. Now I'm going to go for a warmer black, so it's going to be more of the brownish black as opposed to a grayish black. We'll start off with flat black from Scale Color. It's a really good matte black. So I use a wet palette. So we put a little bit on the palette, so it's going to slowly be absorbing the wetness from the sponge under the palette. And also going to use a little bit of flow improver. For a brush, we're going to use the Finisher brush from Gadzooks Gaming. It's a good mid-sized brush, the equivalent of a Zero. Put a little bit of flow improver on there. You'll notice that I mix as I go. So I'm not going to mix all of my paint with my medium. I'm going to just kind of take a little bit of paint and mix it down. And even though I just plan on covering, everything with black, that's the hair, I'm going to do it thin. So it's going to take a couple coats, and that's okay because we're going to get a nice matte black as a result. It'll be nice and thin. We won't lose any detail in the process. So here I'm just simply covering everything that's going to be black hair. Okay, we've sped up a little bit, and I skipped that. Gone right to where we've got most of it here. She's got some things in her hair, so there's some details I need to work around. There's a skull and a rose in her hair. And once we get everything black, now I've also got her shawl I know is going to be black, so you'll see here in a moment I'm also going to go ahead and just, while I'm here, paint the shawl black once I get all the hair done. So even though we're not going to be painting the shawl in this video, I had a good bit of black left on my palette, so I might as well use it up and get the shawl base coated as well. Okay. So now the next thing is I really want to, have there be a definition between the recesses of the hair and then the highlights of the hair, so you can see the texture of the hair. Go ahead and clean up our brush because we're switching brushes. I use the Masters brush cleaner from B&J. So we're going to move from flat black to a petroleum gray, which is another scale 75 paint. This is a brownish gray, and it's very close to black. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and paint all of the strands of hair, but leaving a little bit of black in between, so that we can get some nice definition. And the majority of the hair is going to be this color. I'm using the Artist Opus brush here for this. So we'll go ahead and mix it in with some medium. And let's start defining the kind of the major strands of hair or areas of the hair. And you can see on the model that there's not a huge contrast between the petroleum gray and the black, and that's good. It allows me to paint the majority of this hair, this petroleum gray, but it will still look black, and we'll also still see some, differentiation between the blackest black and this petroleum gray. I am leaving black behind, you'll notice. The top of the head and that kind of that bun that leads to the ponytail is probably going to be the biggest challenge on this model. You'll notice I'm going back over areas again. It's again because I thin my paints a good bit, and this does two things for me. I can put down the first layer nice and thin, and then I can do a second layer nice and thin. But if the second layer isn't quite the same area as the previous, it's a little bit less, you start to see the gradation. It ends up effectively blending between the blackest black and a more opaque petroleum gray. I'm always stopping, checking how it looks. You can get horse blinders when you paint, so always take a step back and look at what you're doing and check yourself. All right, so now we're really getting into the kind of the warm gray or the warm black. So this brown gray still is a gray, but you'll notice it's definitely got a brown hue to it. So this is going to give me my warmer hair. One of the other challenges on this model is I've got this black hair and then I've got a black shawl, and how I'm going to differentiate them is between warm and cold. I'm using an old brush that I've had forever. It's a heavy metal detail brush. Don't even remember how I got it, and I don't even know if they sell them anymore, but it is a brush that has kept a point for me for forever. I probably had this brush for 10 years. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back through and we're going to decide where the sheen and the highlights are going to be, because the way that light reflects against hair is it's very reflective. So it's going to go in parallel lines in short spurts. So you'll notice here that I'm just creating parallel lines on the hair where I want the light to be hitting hard. If you look at the illustration in the upper right, you see that I'm not covering all of the area where I have the petroleum gray, and we're just going in parallel lines. And this is really going to define the highlight areas. The majority of this hair is going to remain just with the black and the petroleum gray, and the way we're going to sell the effect of this hair is with these sheen highlights, which are essentially just going to be parallel lines. And as I'm working this, you'll notice I'll put down the brown gray, then I'll go back and grab some of the petroleum gray and kind of soften the transition. Here I'm going back over with just the brown gray to really kind of bring that up again. And that's what I'm constantly doing, going back and forth to make sure that the brown gray shows the way I want it to, but that I also have a transition at the ends of each of those parallel lines that blend into the petroleum gray. Really one of the big values of using a wet palette is you can, mix and go as you need. Bring colors up, bring colors down, soften edges, do transitions. Now along the top of the head, we're essentially just going to have a series. And here I'm just defining it with a very thin brown gray. But essentially it ends up being a ring of light around the front of the head. Once I've kind of defined it, I'm now going to do a mix that's a little bit more brown gray than my initial. And as I get more towards the brown, less mixed with the petroleum, you'll notice that my strokes become a little bit more precise. It's not uncommon to see me return to an area that I've already painted because the paint's dried, and when things dry, they tend to come down in color. So I go back over and make sure I get things up as high as I want them to be. It's also a function of the Scale 75 paints. The Scale 75 paints are a very matte finish. You really don't know what it's going to look like until it dries. Now this is a large flat area there that I was just working on the back of the ponytail. There really isn't any definition in the sculpt for the strands of hair. It's pretty much flat, so we're going to have to kind of trick the eye a little bit. So here you'll notice I'm just freehanding some rough horizontal lines, parallel lines. And again, the parallel lines go across the planes. And each time as I do another layer, I get a little bit smaller. So now we're going to be a little bit more precise as we apply that brown gray on top of the head to create that ring of light, ring of reflection. And then we got to get the bun up at the top here. It should be catching a good bit of light. Notice me bracing my hand against that armature bar. That's why I love this paint holder so much. That stabilization bar allows you to get real precise at almost any angle on a model. I talked about doing the shawl, which will probably be the next video, and the way I'm going to make that shawl and the hair look different from each other tonally is the shawl is going to be what's called a cold black, which is a black that's more grays and blues versus the browns and reds that you see with a warm black. So what we're doing on the hair is a warm black. What we're going to be doing is a cool black on the shawl, which should really help set it aside. Okay, now here I'm going to get real precise. So I'm hand drawing these parallel strands of hair for the highlights. Again, stopping, going back to previous places, bringing them up again if I need to. Often my first stroke is going to be on my thumb. That'll make sure I don't get a huge spillover. Now you're really starting to see that reflection start to take shape. We still have 2 more colors to go, but we're starting to see it happen now. And back to even where we started, because as I look at it, I realize I need this brown gray to stand out a little bit more on that area. So I'm constantly going through the model, looking, figuring out what needs paint. Now we get a little bit more precise, and a little brown gray where I think it needs to come up. Now you'll notice I've started working on a new area. Again, keeping in parallel, looking at where I see where the light's going to hit. Now I stopped and kind of did a real quick once around on it. And again, this is just not as bright as I needed it to be. So I'm going to go back again with a pure brown gray. Really get that these areas brought up. You don't know this. You don't know if it's right until it dries. That's why I work all around a model with the same color. Other people focus on one little area and use a hairdryer. Nothing wrong with that. This works easier for me and it doesn't require a hairdryer. We've only got one more color that we're going to be using, so we need this brown gray to be tonally pretty high. Okay, so our last step is bringing in a Mojave white, which is a brownish white, a bone white if you will. And this is going to be my final highlight on the hair. I'm not going to be painting a very large area. We're going to use Gadget Gaming's micro brush for this. It's a very tiny brush. You also notice on my palette that I've already put down some flow improver on the palette. So there's some wetness on top of the palette, and this is going to be very thin. It's going to be a glaze, this last step. And working with glazes with something this precise can be a little tricky. In fact, you'll be seeing me make a mistake a little bit later, and I'll show you how I corrected that mistake. Because I was really too watery. But now we're just doing tiny little slivers. And then they're going to be parallel to each other. And this is going to take several layers to get this as bright as I want it to be, with the final little bit just being a dot. I'm really kind of defining where it's going to be, and then you'll notice once I get where I want this final highlight to be, I'll spend time really smoothing out the transitions. Right now it looks very stark between the Mojave white and the brown gray, but we're going to be going back over that. Now here's where I didn't check it on my thumb, and you'll notice I'm not getting the precision I need from this. In fact, I think I even try it one more time. Even test it on my thumb, and the pigment's coming off the brush too quick. But this is a good opportunity for you to see, mistakes happen, and if your paint's nice and thin, you just correct it by rubbing your thumb against it. I added some more, off camera, I added some more of the Mojave white undiluted up top here, and I need it to be a little less watery so I can get kind of that precision line, but you'll notice I even messed this up too. So far so good. Here's the mistake. It just spilled off the brush onto the thing. So here's a nice technique. Quickly wash your brush off and just throw water all over it. And that'll spread the pigment all over to the point where it's not going to affect anything. All right, third time's a charm. So we're painting just little slivers. And you'll notice even though I'm going across the planes to a different section of hair, it's still parallel because the light is going to hit all of those areas. Getting that brightened up nicely. We're going to go back, of course, and kind of smooth out the transitions a little bit more in a second. Let's first get things as bright as we need them to be. You can already see, you know, up above there, places that I painted a little while back. It's already, you know, gone flat on me, so I'll go back over with some more white. So now I'm going to mix some of that brown gray in. And let's work on the transition between the Mojave white and the brown gray. So kind of glaze the very edges, and eventually really making the areas that are just the pure Mojave white are going to be even smaller as I work the transition between the Mojave white and the brown gray. So I'm constantly mixing my paints live on the palette. And using very thin glazes to make those transitions work. In the end, I need the white to be really small to sell this effect, because that small pure white is what's going to make it look like hair. See me softening the areas between the brown gray and the Mojave white. The same way we did the ponytail, we're going to work on the top of the head here. It's just going to be a smaller area, so it's going to require a little bit more precision on my part. Technique-wise, it's the same as I did on the ponytail. I can bring some of the white up to the bun on the up top, of course. Constantly looking, constantly checking. As things dry, how do they look? Do I need to go back? Ultimately looking for really a small white dot along this crown of her head. This is where brush control is key. People say, do you need a small brush? Do you need a brush with a good point? The answer is definitely a strong point. You don't necessarily need a small brush. What you need more than anything is brush control, which is where you have an understanding of how paint's going to come off of that brush. And unfortunately, there's no secret trick or substitute for practice. Practice with the type of paint and the style. Okay, let's do just a quick look and make sure everything's hitting where we want it to hit. And as things have dried, are my up areas as high as I need them to be? On a couple spots that need a little bit more attention. Even going back to the ponytail, give it that one last little hit of Mojave. Finish off getting the little bun at the top of the head there. Tough angle, the skull's right in our way, but I'm doing the same thing I did on the crown of the head. And get the top of the ponytail here, again, just little white dots, parallel to each other, in a line. All right, well, that's black hair. You can see it still looks reflective, but the hair, you can tell, is still black, even though there's a lot of browns and grays and whites in it. All right, make sure you like and subscribe. We'll start working on the shawl in part 5. I appreciate everybody watching. Take care.